Good morning, Tyree. How are
Good
you?
morning. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I see there's a window there, and I know windows are very much a part of your writing process. So
That
I
is
am
true.
going to ask you, what's outside your window?
What's outside my window? Across the street, there's like a bush line. I live in a neighborhood, so there's like a bush line in the sidewalk. And across the street is this like pond, but really it's just water runoff that they collect right there. And it's beside an elementary school. Kids playing during recess, but not anymore.
Yeah. Well, I found myself in thinking about what it means to live as a writer. I found myself thinking about what it's been like to study with you and to listen to your own experience of diving into the cave of oneself.
Mm.
I had fun digging into your cave a little bit, I think.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is going into your chapbooks as well as going into river hymns, going into Cardinal. The thing about your work, it's not. I'm not going to call it creepy. I don't find your work creepy. I definitely find it to play in the realm of a space that I was afraid of for a very long time, and that I now am very drawn into. And I want to look at your work in the space of paying homage because I feel that that's a part of what your work does. I feel that it plays homage in many directions. One of them being to the dead. There's a way that your work pays homage to the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious about whether you would call your attention to the dead an obsession. And if so, how does that obsession feed you?
Mm. I think the feeding me is also connected to the obsession. I think so. I think my obsession from the dead comes from being in a family that, death was never hidden from you at no matter what age. And I think about that, a lot in my life. Like I was exposed to death and told what death was very early.
I see.
So I think that's why it's one of my obsessions. Also, my grandmother, who I write about, and my uncle Boo Boo passed away
Mhm.
when I was young. So of course, right, that's my obsession. Like I'm
Yeah.
writing about them. But I think why the reason I continue to write about the dead and why poets continue to write about the dead is because to die is to be a complete human being, right? And that's what poets are interested in. What does it mean to be a complete, like, not even is it complete or is it stripped, a stripped just raw human being? And to know that you have to die, right? um that's why I think poets are always, investigating death, right? Asking these questions, talking to the dead, right? I think that's what we're trying to figure out. Well, at least I think I can say we. I think we're trying to figure out what does it mean to be, just this stripped human eye, right? This stripped eye. And I think that's why, right, I'm coming back. I'm constantly coming back to the dead. But I think I'm doing that in my work in general. Right? I'm trying to answer that question, right? And I usually try to answer that question through memory, right? By going back, looking for something, a glimpse of something to tell me more about what it means to be a human being, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you talk about death in that way, would you say you're looking at the way that there are different initiations in one life and there's a dying leading into the next stage of you, the next version of Tyree Daye, like the person that dies to make the new, to unleash the new consciousness within the being, and also physical death? Like, are you looking at it
Oh,
physically and
okay,
physically?
okay. I'm looking at it. I don't know. I don't really separate the two. I think when at least when I'm thinking about it in terms of poetry, I'm thinking of it's to die, right? To know what death is. But then, I'm also writing and talking to the dead. So I'm assuming there's an afterlife where the dead can move around.
Yes.
And I think my poems and I think people who write about the dead, some are interested in, that completeness of life, right? To truly know what it means to be human is to know what death is, right?
Yeah. So, and you've already alluded to this I'm going to ask the question just because I'm curious about your own. I think I'm curious about whether there are traditional religions that connect to this space that you go, and how does talking to the dead relate to poetry? What is talking to the dead as craft? That's really my question, is what is talking to the dead as a craft? And because you've already said we, I feel that there's a lineage of folks who have, done this same particular interaction that you're calling on. I'm curious about who some of those poets are as well.
So I think of poets like Nikki Finney. I think of Russell Clifton. I think of Kwame Dwaz. I think of Chris Abani. I think of Evie Shockley. I think of Toy Derricott. I think of Araceli Escamilla. I think of Nathaniel Mackey. There's so many, and I wanted to say, I guess, what is the connection? I think for me, raising a family who, not only had this kind of close relationship to the dead and didn't really think about us being young and and us being exposed to the dead, but also just having this superstition where, when we go to visit my grandmother's grave, you don't step on those other people's graves, right? That kind of respect and rapport with the dead. Don't do this, or the dead is going to do this, right? Or don't talk about the dead and all that, right? And I think a connection to the African continent, right? And so I think it makes sense that we see this across these Black poets, right? I think that's something very African, these superstitions that you live by, right? And some of those superstitions are connected to the dead. I guess now we think of them as superstitions, but before they were more, there was something to live by and not considered superstition. The craft of the dead. Yeah. I think it's getting down to that I, right? As a poet that writes the I think of the I as, I think of my I as like really trying to strip down to something bare, to like become like essentially human, right? And I think a part of that essential humanness is to also speak to the dead, right? To be authentic. For my eye, to be authentic, it often goes to the dead, to be authentic, to feel what it means to be a complete human being.
And do you find that does it feed you as a writer?
Maybe. I mean, I have all these kind of traditions that like developed in my head because I write about my dead. Right. So yes, it feeds me because they're my family that I'm writing about. But also, when a cardinal flies by me, right, and I've been thinking about my dad for so long, I'm like, of course that's my uncle, or of course that's my grandmother, right?
Yeah.
Or the other day I was walking my dog and I looked over and there was two hawks sitting on the fence around the pond. I was like, yeah, of course those birds are some ancestors, right? So maybe that's how it feeds me, because I'm always looking, right? Of course, signs start to pop up. So maybe it feeds me that way, and it keeps the investigation going.
So you follow the signs. You believe them?
I guess I follow them. I believe them, and I follow them through the writing.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not chasing hawks through the neighborhood.
So that moves me. That's the perfect segue. You're not chasing hawks. So okay. So there's a way. So moving into another aspect of how I see your work paying homage. Your work pays homage to the land, to the land that you come from, that your ancestors come from, land that before you all arrived there was likely kept by indigenous peoples. Like there's this, land has so much history of I think in an interview you talked about the land holding the spit of the tobacco, ancestors chewing tobacco and the spit hitting the dirt, and how the dirt holds blood and water and memory, which sends me to, Toni Morrison and Memory Waters and so many other places. So when I think of the fact that you spent much of your childhood wandering in the woods, I find myself terrified, because I can remember that I wanted to do that. I would stand at the edge of the woods in the backyard and almost dare myself to go. And instead I would imagine what was in there. because I was convinced I wouldn't make it out alive. So I'm going to ask you if you could take me on a walk with you in maybe your favorite set of woods. Let's say we're 9 or 10 years old and we're going to go into the woods that you would spend hours in. What would you want me to see in those woods?
First, I want to say I love what you said about your experience with the woods, that you would stand at the edge and like dare yourself to go in and then wonder what's happening in there. I don't know. I'm just really interested in if someone would to explore that in a poem, like what does daring language sound like coupled with this woods, like daring to go in the woods, and what does that language sound like? There's something very interesting about that. So also, I want to increase my age to 13. I was more allowed to go more places, I guess. So I'm thinking of the woods behind my mother's home. We also had like friends in the neighborhood that we would just go deep into the woods, probably on someone's land that we had no business on, of course. Also, I'm thinking of the risk of my like how that works in my poems, the risk of my own body, but also the physical harm that like I could cause like to nature or to like I think about that risk. I feel like it works both ways in my poems. That might be that mischiefness, that part of the poems. Because of that risk of being like in the woods, I'm thinking about poems in river hymns mostly. And I think, because of the history, right? The history in this country when it comes to like Black bodies, I think anytime you put, a Black child in the woods, there's this fear that instantly starts to grow. Every turn, and I mean like turn, it's like in the line. Also in those woods, you're expecting something to happen, right? Something bad to go wrong. So maybe that, I think I recognize that, and I'm always trying to add tension to my poems, and I think maybe that's why I go into the woods, right? As a kid, I was just, I wanted to wonder. That's the wondering part of my poems as well, because I'm so interested in just wonder.
And even in that craft movie, you talk about the turn. Was there ever a time, and this is very much like a memory question, ever a time in the woods where something very unexpected happened?
Yeah, I instantly started thinking about this time we were deep in the woods. Out in the country, you have those fields, woods, open fields, and those power lines that we run in, right? And so we came out in one of those, and then we heard some man coming out saying, "Hey!" And we just took off and ran back home. That, right? That's definitely one of those moments.
There's something else I'm hearing too when you're talking about the land and talking about it in terms of wandering and craft and thinking about homage. When you're allowing yourself to wander in the poem and thinking about the land and what's been done to the land, how do you not insert what it is in the sense of to be fact about what is happening to the land, and allow yourself to moving into a space of wandering while knowing that simply because you live in the body that you're in, you're going to bring those things to the page. You're going to have an awareness of things that are happening around you, but there's a way that you don't force it in your work. Do you find that the wandering in the woods is what helps you do that? What is it that helps you do that? And do you see it as a distancing from the world? I don't. I'm going to pose the question.
I love that distancing part as well. I don't know. I think when I'm thinking about poems of wandering and like wandering through the woods and within my particular body, I feel like it's naturally there. You know what I mean? Like the same way I don't have to tell you that the people in my poems are Black. Right. I think that danger is naturally there. Also, writing from the South, right? All of that's in there already.
Yes.
But I think you can, like that list you gave, I think you can do that all. Like you can state fact and still wonder, right? I think of just breathing in and out. Maybe when you're breathing in, that's the wonder, and then you're breathing out, and that's maybe that's the fact part. But you can move, right, in a poem. You can move between all of that. You can wonder about a pine tree and then also state facts about a pine tree.
Right.
So in my poems, I have no problem with doing that. I think of a poem like Towards the Mouth of the River and River Hymns. That
Mm-hmm.
poem has scientific facts in it, right, about whirling
Mm-hmm.
disease, but also it's full of wonder. So I have, I guess I'm trying to think about how do I balance that, Maybe it's in the music of the language, so maybe the facts that I'm giving you and also the language about wonder, like maybe they have similar syllable counts. Maybe that's how it's, right, I'm getting away with it. I think readers are smart enough as well to move from wonder to fact, right? Or from fact
Mm-hmm.
to wonder.
When we're talking about what's at stake in the poems, and if the poems are doing work, I'm curious about how you stand in the space that is for you to stand in as a poet, regardless of what others may think about where you should be standing.
Well, I guess I should first say no one has told me that I should be, writing a particular thing or that I'm not writing how I'm supposed. I mean, if they did, I would I don't even know. I'll probably just laugh about it. I'm sure. I don't know. I've never been, though I had to learn, right? I had to learn that what I write is what I write. You know what I mean? That my obsessions are worth just as much as anyone else's. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
So I'm definitely at that point. And also just because those are the teachers I had to. When I was getting my MFA, I went to Eduardo C. Corral and I said, I read my poems and then I read stuff I've been seeing online and my poems don't sound like that. Mm-hmm. And Eduardo really helped me realize that's a good thing, right? That you mm-hmm. want your own distinct voice and right. And so I don't think about that, or wouldn't, right? At least now I wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I feel like all of that, about being Black in America, all of that's there, right? Also, I think about a book like Cardinal. Cardinal's mm-hmm. full of wonder, but also Cardinal is about trying to wonder and trying to see the fullness of your life in a racist country, right? That's what mm-hmm. Cardinal's about. So I don't know. I think I can do it all. I think poets can do it all, yes. and I think also the work will naturally come out.
I agree. And realizing that it's really courageous to hone in on your voice and what it is that you're doing, because there is space for us all to be doing all we would like to be doing. My family is very important to me. It's clear to me just in reading your poetry that is the case for you, that you come from a close-knit family. What I've recently had to acknowledge is that I watched my grandfather type sermons at a typewriter for hours. So in my own lineage, my own family lineage, there is a writer there that I never saw as a writer because we have a complicated relationship. But there's a craft that I was being taught in just watching him. I read that your mother would read a book or two in a day while you would be out in these woods. And so I'm really curious about what craft tools you think are up your mother's sleeve, that she maybe called it something else, but what was it that she was teaching you about reading, writing, and being a self in the world? Yeah, I'm really curious about the craft from your mother. I really am.
Oh, that's such a great question. Well, I should say first, my mom is the reason I'm into poetry or even considered poetry. First, she's the one that bought me the Langston Hughes collective. I want to say junior or senior year, I don't remember. But she brought me that collective, and that was my first introduction to poetry, really, and my first time hearing the music and seeing things that felt familiar to me, right? Mm-hmm. And because that was the case, it instantly started sparking my own language, right? And I feel like that happens with a lot of us when we see something familiar. But my mom, before that, when I was younger, my mom was always a storyteller. My mom would, and I think this also fits to why I'm also just I don't know, I think you called my poems creepy earlier, and I think there is a creepiness in them. But it's because I grew up in a house where I would get told these scary stories before bed, right? I don't know. There's mystery in those stories. There's also, what's the word? There's mystery, and there's also this myth making in a way, right? And there's always, and those stories are always full of people. So you're building this world, neighborhood at the same time. My mom would tell me things when she was younger, her mom told her, if you lie to her, the devil's going to take you out of bed and put you in a box by the pond, and you're gonna belong to him, and like things like that before I go to bed.
You don't belong to him.
Right? Right. So things like that. Other just terrifying stories. One story about my granddad, my uncle, and some friends out like hunting in the woods.
Yeah.
And this little white dog walking out of the woods, and they ran back, and for some reason it made them run in the house, and the dog ran after them, and it was in a log cabin, and all you could see between the cabin was these pieces of some man who the dog ate flesh in between the log. Like, yeah, right?
And then it's turned off. Good night, Tyree.
Right, exactly. Well, good night. And so, but because of that, I think my mind would then sit in the dark and start to wonder. Mm-hmm. And really, she was teaching me the craft of storytelling to invoke something, to convince someone emotionally, right? That's all of that's there in the telling of a scary story. So I think that's why naturally my poems are just full of that mystery. Also, I'm from the South, and so I think in the South, we have this very interesting relationship with the dead and other mysterious things, I'll say.
Yeah. And I'm gonna ask another question about family. What are some questions that your mom or any other family members that show up in your writing, or others that don't? What are some questions that maybe they've helped you ask about your writing? And spending time with you as a student, there were questions I would have never known to ask of my work. I started to think about my own granddad and sit with the poem and realize, he'd have a lot of questions about this. Or just let it kind of inviting them to ask questions. And I don't know if that's something that you do or not, but I'm really curious about how your family, dead or alive, helps you to ask questions of your work while you're writing.
I love that question. So questions I consider when I'm writing of my dead, well, I think I asked this of all my poems. I asked, does this feel true? Right? Even if the poem is full of wonder, I think, again, right, there's a truth to it. Even if the language is not saying exactly what happened, right?
Right.
There's a truth to it. So I asked, is this the truth, right? How am I using them, right? And how are they using me in the poem? And when I think about that question, I think my using part needs to be, first, is it pushing me forward, right? Is it pushing my eye to another place? I think that's important. Or is it just empty language, right? Is it talking? Is it speaking of the dead in empty language? Like, how is it pushing? What is it pushing forward? I think that's a really big, important part. I also think, when writing about your dead, I think it's important I like to tell my dead I miss them a lot. I think there's a certain sentimentality that I try to reach for. And I think you can reach for when you're talking about the dead. That's a big part of my work. But I think I reach for that a lot in my work with sentimentality, right? I think in all my books, right, both River Hymns and Cardinal, right, this phrase, I love you, right, that will come out of in the poems a lot. So those are the things I think about. I think about where I'm placing my dead also in a poem. What are we doing? How does the speaker need them? Right? All of that.
I'm not going to remember who had the conversation, but the question amazed me. Are your dead alive when you're writing, or are your dead dead? Do they know they're dead?
I think they know, and the speaker of the poem knows. I think they're dead, but they're also not in the poem that they are alive, but and also they're not in the room with me. But I don't know, if the poem is a world, I think of poems as spheres. If the poem is right in the world, like in that world, they can move around. Also, I'm thinking about now, like how much consciousness I give the dead in my poems. And I don't think I necessarily do. I think they're there. They also work as like a marker of something or a way to help the speaker, right? A speaker may call out to. I think that happens a lot in my poem.
I'm gonna move to what I am calling, like, what I see as like you paying homage to a poetic lineage, which includes your teachers. It includes the book your mother gave you, the Langston Hughes Collective. And so I really love how you acknowledge musicians and writers who fed you along the way. And I assume that they fed the speaker, I should say, along the way because of how they appear. And so when I saw that Etheridge Knight's Belly song, I think you said was maybe the next book. Does that sound right? That was the next book that pulled you in after Langston Hughes?
Yes. Yeah, I can say that. Belly Song.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Such an important book to me. Yeah, I think of Etheridge Knight as a poet of the heart, right? And I think about I think about that in my own work, like heart language, I guess.
That's exactly what that's exactly where I was going. Is I was thinking about who you had us read last semester, which was
Ali Young Lee.
Yeah. And we read Rose.
Another poet of the heart.
Right, exactly. Yes. And so I'm really interested in how the craft of not just their poems, the craft of their lives have fed you. I have a feeling you know they're poets of the heart, yes, because of their work. I'm very curious about the heart you found in their work and what you find in their life that propels you. Because, when I'm thinking of lineage, I'm thinking of inheritance, and I'm thinking of, especially when we're dealing with poetry and what we find ourselves drawn to, it's almost choosing an inheritance or allowing yourself to be called into a particular lineage. And so I'm really curious in your study of their lives and what you found in it for yourself as a writer.
That's such an interesting question because, without their experiences, I guess that's a question for me. Without their experiences, would they write the same way or just but about other experiences, or because of their experiences they write this certain way? And I don't know the answer to that one. While I'm drawn to both because they risk sentimentality, right? They get really I love a poem that the speaker in it feels like close to crying, like in their word choice and how they put the phrases together in a sentence. I think of it'd be really great to actually see an essay comparing those two poets. But I even feel like the way they approach the line, I can hear similarities, right? There's a softness, but also there's a mischievousness in both of those poets. I'm thinking about both of their lives, and I don't think that's what I'm drawn to. I think I'm drawn to the sentimentality, the music, the softness of it, of the language. I wanted to say, I personally don't think we choose the music that draws us in to write. I think we have these experiences from our past and these voices in our head that we are drawn to. And then when we hear that, right, in a piece of art, or see that in a piece of art, we're like, oh, that's from, oh yeah, I like that, right? And then we imitate that. I don't know how much we get to choose. I think we can, of course we can choose, right? We can say, oh no, I'm gonna do this over here, this music that I don't really feel comfortable with, but I'm gonna try it. We do that all the time. But I do think there's a music that we're like drawn to because of our experiences. I think it makes sense that I was drawn to Etheridge Knight, right? From the South. Also this relationship with the dead, family, right? Woods, nature, all of that. And he's a bluesman, right? The language at the core, the music at the core is blues. So I think that makes sense for my work as well.
I think a lot about your work and the homage that, like, I know there's a speaker in the work, and I also feel, though, that because you are from this small place, Youngsville, North Carolina, that Youngsville, North Carolina in itself becomes a character. Also, there's something about Youngsville, North Carolina being a character that I think makes me wonder about how beautiful it is that you've decided to pay homage to the self in this way. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. I mean that in very much, this is the place that the poet came from. And so I feel that your work pays homage to self in that way. And because of that, I found myself really curious about what it is that keeps you Tyree. There are we have publishing industry, and then there are like alternative economies that people are building, or ways that people are thinking about diversifying publishing and how it is that we can produce in ways that honor our humanity as opposed to kind of living like machines. And I think in an interview, C.A. Conrad talks about coming from a town where they grew up, where everyone was working in factories, and knowing that they wanted to leave this place because they didn't want to become a part of this machine. They leave, they begin to do their work and create poems, and they're like, oh shit, now my poems have become a factory. And so they take a break and kind of come back to the page kind of with a different set of intentions, realizing that they had kind of, and these are my words, where you kind of pick up what's inside of you and carry it forward, not really knowing it's there. And then there's something in life that shows you it, and then you have the opportunity to, make you have maybe a fork in the road, or maybe there's 4 or 5 forks in the road, but there's an opportunity for you to reassess what works for you, and thinking about the capacity of a human being and what keeps Tyree sane as a writer. And I'm asking this question not so much to focus and hone in personally on you, but really, I think that a poet like you is a possibility model for other poets. And I think that it's important that we talk about how we stay alive. And so I'm really interested in how you allow yourself to be fed and nourished in the midst of constant production.
I love that question. I don't know. For me, it's the search. Like, I'm, in all my poems and everything I do, I'm searching for something, right? Some unanswerable question that I know I'll never get the answer to, but that's okay, right? That's not, I don't want the answer. The search to get that answer. And I think the question is, what does it mean to be a human being? Like, stripped of everything, that essential I, what does that mean, right? And so the search is what keeps me going, right? Trying to figure that out. And I look for the answer to that question, right? That unanswerable question. I look for it everywhere, right? I go outside and I look for it. I'm in a room and I look for it. I'm talking to people and I'm looking for it, right? Constantly trying to answer that question, and like all the complexities of what that means too, right? Love, death, desire, right? And everything else. And I think that's what keeps me going, at least with, thinking about poetry, that every day, right? If I'm listening to a song, I'm looking for it, right?
Yeah. I can't tell you all the ways that your work has been impactful in my life, but it is. Yeah. There's a way in which you can be conditioned to forget that those things matter and turn your attention to so many other things. You are a poet that helps me remember what matters. And so I want to say thank you for that. And I appreciate you agreeing to do this interview with me. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. We try to look for what's considered bigger and better. And you know what I mean? That's not. Right. And that thing is not, at least for me and you, not true to us. I was told the same thing. I should leave North Carolina. I should go to New York City, right?
Right.
I'm really happy that I was raised to be proud for, right? And to love the people in the place I'm from. Yeah.
For me, it was different. There was internalized anti-Blackness. And so there's a way that your work, I so love that I can feel the difference in your work of what it is to love oneself in a space that is teaching you and showing you something else. And I know that that what I was taught was also taught out of survival. It wasn't so that I could hate myself, So it's just fascinating how alive poetry is. Like, you weren't writing these poems so I would pick them up one day and better understand my life, but it did happen like that. And so that's why I like poetry. Yeah, keep writing, keep staring out the window, keep taking the weird walks. Keep being creepy, Tyree. Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.